Hello biologists, this is Miss R and we're going to do lab 4.15 together. We're going to talk about nitrogen fixation and biogeochemistry in general. These two pictures are of my yard. This here is one clover plant I pulled out, and we're going to talk about some special things about clover plants in general today. This over here is grass, and you can see the root structure is a little bit different. There's going to be something very unique about clover that grass doesn't have. This lab is kind of getting excited for gardening season. It's the middle of May here in Minnesota, and in my part of Minnesota, down here in the Twin Cities in St. Paul, it's time to get growing. You can actually take your tomato plants that you've been carefully growing inside and put them outside now because the last danger of frost is supposedly past. But first, before we talk too much about gardening, by the way, both of these are from my garden. This is my backyard. I would have been out there today, but it's a little chilly and windy, so the mic doesn't work. This is June, and everything is growing and blooming in my backyard. We've got a little waterfall. It's kind of cool. And these are my strawberries. We're going to talk more about them later in this lab and what they need to be healthy plants. All plants, including strawberries, need nitrogen to be healthy. And the reason that they need nitrogen is for root growth, and also the green stuff. Notice this plant is nice and green, and my tomato plants that I grew are not so green because I didn't fertilize them probably enough, and they didn't get a lot of light this spring. It's kind of a dark, cloudy, rainy spring. Those plants are green because of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a very unique molecule that helps them capture the sun's energy and make glucose. So all plants are green because of chlorophyll, and that chlorophyll helps them do photosynthesis. And nitrogen, you can see here's the molecular structure of chlorophyll. And nitrogen is a key element here in this chlorophyll. So if you don't have nitrogen, no chlorophyll. No chlorophyll, no photosynthesis, no glucose. Sad plants and sad you. So, number 2, make sure you have the lab sheet from Doc sharing, by the way. What kinds of plants, with the help of bacteria, can fix nitrogen from the air? That's N2 from the air. Well, clover, great plant to intermix with your grass in your yard. Legumes in general, peas, or other lupines. Alfalfa has nodules in its roots that are home for bacteria, and that bacteria can fix nitrogen from the air. And peanuts. So peanuts, peas or pea-related plants, clover, alfalfa, and all the legumes, the bean plants, have the unique ability to work with bacteria to fix nitrogen right out of the air, so they don't need nitrogen fertilizer. Clover plants, I pulled some out of the yard. I plant clover in with my regular grass in my backyard. You can see these little deals right here. They're called nodules, and they happen to be pink. I counted the number of nodules. I counted the number of pink nodules, and the pink ones are important because they have bacteria in them. And the bacteria helps the clover to fix nitrogen from the air. When I looked at a grass plant, no nodules, no pink nodules, no bacteria on this grass plant. So grass can't fix its own nitrogen, and grass, if you want like the healthy green lush lawn, you have to fertilize with something. It doesn't necessarily have to be chemical fertilizer, but it's going to need some nitrogen. What's living in those clover nodules that makes them pink? Well, rhizobium bacteria right here. This is how you spell it, rhizobium. It's a bacteria that comes in through the root hairs and plops in here and takes up residence right in these nodules here. And it forms a symbiotic relationship with the plant. Here's a more close-up view. The relationship between these two organisms, the win-win that happens when the plant gives the bacteria a home, a place to live, free rent, and in return the bacteria gives the plant nitrogen. It can convert nitrogen from the air into a form that's usable for the plant. Which is pretty cool because everybody wins, and that's called symbiosis. Symbiosis. If you want to write that down on your lab sheet, it's right here. Symbiosis. It really means everybody wins. Both organisms benefit. What are some cells in the why are some cells in the clover nodule larger than others? This is number 5 on your lab sheet. Well, if you check out these larger cells here in the clover root nodule, these cells, you can see the little tiny dots, and those are bacteria. The bacteria cells are much smaller than the clover cells. These are plumb full of bacteria that's working hard for the plant. In exchange, the clover plant's given the bacteria a place to live and sheltering it. So it's a win-win. Number 6, explain why corn needs more nitrogen than soybeans. Here in Minnesota, we all know that we grow a lot of corn and soybeans, and if you're growing corn, you've got to fertilize like it's your job. Because corn does not have any nodules on the roots, and any nitrogen that corn needs, remember corn needs nitrogen in every other plant here, including my lovely little tomato, needs nitrogen to make chlorophyll, and it needs chlorophyll to photosynthesize in order to make glucose and make its own food from carbon dioxide and water. And the nitrogen that corn needs has to come out of the soil. And corn's pretty greedy. It sucks a lot of nitrogen out of the soil. It's pretty hard on your soil. So people often rotate in soybeans because soybeans are a legume. They have nodules. They can fix their own nitrogen, and they're not so tough on the soil and don't need so much nitrogen fertilizer, which is also can be hard on the water, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But here are some soybean roots. They've got tons of nodules growing on them. This is a good thing for the soybean plant, and it's a good thing for the soil because the soybean plant might not use all that nitrogen and might leave some behind for next year if the person running the farm decides to grow corn. So they rotate the two crops, soybean and corn, to keep the nitrogen in the soil, hopefully. So let's talk about nitrogen fertilizers. If you go to your favorite fertilizer store, and whether you're buying chemical fertilizer or you're buying the groovy stuff, the bag's probably going to have 3 numbers on it. And those numbers stand for nitrogen. That's the element nitrogen. Remember, you need nitrogen to make chlorophyll. Chlorophyll's the green stuff you need to photosynthesize. We don't have chlorophyll. We still need nitrogen for other things, but not as much as plants. Phosphorus, P. You need phosphorus. You need phosphorus to make ATP, and so does the plant. It's also good for root growth, blossoms, and fruits. Potassium is also important for root development and disease resistance. So those 3 numbers stand for NPK. If there's a big number here, that means the fertilizer's got lots of nitrogen. If it's got a big number here, that means it's high in phosphorus. If it's got a big number here, it means it's high in potassium. NPK. 3 numbers, 3 elements. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's number 7. Number 8. Before you go to the fertilizer store, you should get a test kit, and you should test your soil. Here is my strawberry beds. Remember we were talking about my delicious strawberries? I was testing my soil. This is actually the after test. After I put down this very high in phosphorus, groovy natural fertilizer that's made out of ground up bones. Happens to be very high in phosphorus, as you can see in the P test. It's the phosphorus test. Nice, rich phosphorus soil after I fertilized with bone meal. But number 8, test your soil. Before you fertilize, test your soil. If you don't, you might not even need fertilizer and you can save your money. If you do need fertilizer, you can buy something that's high in N or high in P or high in K, something that's right for your soil. If you do live in Minneapolis, you don't get any phosphorus. If you buy fertilizer in Minneapolis, it's not going to have any phosphorus in it because A, you don't really need it, and B, it just ends up in the lakes and makes your lakes nasty. If you ever driven by a smelly, nasty lake in the summer, it's because it probably has too much nitrogen or too much phosphorus from runoff that's going into the lake. Not all fertilizer comes in a bag from your hardware store or your big box home needs store. These chickens produce amazing fertilizer. Compost chicken manure is fabulously high in nitrogen. In fact, you have to be careful. If you put too much on, it can harm your plants. Cow poop is great fertilizer too. You need to let it compost. Organic farmers do use cow manure all the time, but they let it compost for a year before they put it on. I think it's actually 6 months they're required to get the harmful bacteria out of it and let the good bacteria that are starting to break it down into soil nutrients. This stuff is like vitamins for your plants. They love it. And it's great to put cow manure on your field if you do it correctly. If you put it in a big lagoon, like a lot of the feedlots do, you can get some nasty bacteria growing in there and you can get a nasty mess. And this can all leak into your groundwater, and yeah, you don't want that to happen. So it's probably better if you compost it, put it in a big pile, compost it, and get it out there on the fields where it can do the plants some good instead of leaking into your groundwater. This is an argument against manure lagoons. Basically, it's a big lake of cow poop. Generally, not a good idea if you can avoid it. Go for a smaller operation where you don't need one of these. Compost is free fertilizer too. I grow this stuff in my backyard. I throw all my leaves, my banana peels, orange peels, broccoli stalks that I don't like to eat. I know you're supposed to eat them, but I don't. Throw them in your composter. Let these guys go to work. Isopods, millipedes. I have a little ecosystem going on there, and this compost is fabulous for your plants. What happens if you use too much fertilizer? This is a lake. You might live near a lake that looks like this in the middle of summer. That's because you're getting too much nitrogen and too much phosphorus into the lake. And that grows algae, and then really nothing else can grow. It smothers the lake. Or you get too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, the algae grows, sucks up all the oxygen. Because it dies, it doesn't need oxygen when it's growing, but once the algae uses up all the nitrogen or phosphorus, it dies, falls to the bottom, and sucks up all the oxygen. The bacteria that eats the algae sucks up all the oxygen and nothing else can live. And you end up with this very dead-looking creek. This is a picture from Maryland. Thank you, Nat Geo. What can you do besides soil tests to prevent nitrogen runoff? Well, don't put too much nitrogen to begin with. And then you can do things like strip cropping to prevent the fertilizer from running off. You can test your soil all over your farm and use very sophisticated equipment to put just the right amount down. And that'll keep it from running off because your plants will use it all. Number 12, what structure in the lupine roots makes it function well in poor soil? Root nodules. That you should know that from Lab 4.11. And number 13, last one. Well, you can answer 14 on your own. Explain the importance of bacteria in the nitrogen cycle. What does nitrifying bacteria do, and what does denitrifying bacteria? Well, nitrifying bacteria are the ones that live in the plant roots. Denitrifying bacteria work the other way. They take the nitrates that the nitrogen fixing bacteria make and convert it back into atmospheric nitrogen. So